It's currently almost impossible to find a newly released non-indie game that does not have DLC in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's a simple cosmetic microtransaction or a whole expansion that was pre-built into the game before release, paid downloadable content is literally everywhere. But when did this all start, and why? I remember purchasing PlayStation 2 games like the original God of War, which provided you with tons of additional outfits for Kratos after completing the game's story and some extra challenges. In fact, that was the standard practice for most games. You were enticed to play a second run-through of the game after completion due to gimmicks like being able to wear cow costumes. I mean, you did just spend $60 on a game. The least developers could do was provide you with enough content for that purchase price to keep you busy a little while longer. But at some point in time, really during the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era, that changed. In fact, items that really should have been included in the game from the get-go started costing players additional money. And that very quickly became the standard practice when publishers started realizing how much extra money could be made. Now, before we get too deep into the game that I feel had the largest impact on this shift in gaming culture, I want to talk about the different types of DLC or downloadable content. First off, we have expansions. This is the oldest form of DLC and was popularized in the world of PC gaming, specifically in MMOs. Technically, expansions trace back to board games even before that, but today we're just focusing on video games. Now, if you look it up online, you'll see games like Command & Conquer and the original Grand Theft Auto credited with really introducing expansions. However, I believe one company, Blizzard Entertainment, really should be credited with influencing these. Some of the most notable expansions are World of Warcraft's The Burning Crusade and Diablo's Hellfire even before that. An expansion is a large addition to the game, usually providing a new chapter to the story and often changing some of the game's core mechanics to improve balancing. These expansion DLCs are quite literally taking the base game and expanding it to provide the player with more content. Now, expansions are the form of DLC that I have the least frustrations with. For many companies in the early 2000s, these expansions weren't initially planned when releasing a game. However, after a game's success, they were used as a way to provide players with more content to enjoy for another one-time fee, almost like purchasing a sequel to the game. The next type of DLC, and the most commonly seen one today, is a microtransaction. Now, this is the laziest version of additional content, and it's just a way to generate additional revenue by preying on consumers. Microtransactions are quite literally small transactions, or at least they used to be. During the 360 PS3 era, on a game that costed $60, it became somewhat common to see additional items in the store that were an extra $2 to $3. To clarify, I have no problems at all with microtransactions in free-to-play games. Games like Fortnite and Call of Duty Warzone actually rely on microtransactions to stay alive. And I also don't mind microtransactions when they provide worthwhile content to a consumer, such as a new song in Guitar Hero or Rock Band. What I do have a problem with is when a game costs $60 and then you have to pay for additional content like an extra outfit, when really that should have been in the initial game like the previously mentioned God of War for PlayStation 2. To me, it's like buying a pizza with a slice missing and then having the pizza shop tell you that if you want the last slice, you have to pay an extra small fee for it. In my opinion, and this could just be because of the games that I personally grew up playing, I believe that one game had a larger impact on console game DLCs than any other game, and that game is The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Now, Oblivion's DLCs are quite confusing, because this game somehow managed to have both one of the most widely regarded excellent DLCs, and also one of the most widely regarded terrible DLCs. It's super confusing to see a company hold both of these titles for the same game, but honestly that's what I've come to expect from Bethesda. First, we will talk about the previously mentioned terrible DLC, and that is the notorious horse armor cosmetic that was released on April 3rd, 2006. The reason that I believe this is one of the games that really pushed downloadable content into that scummy microtransaction direction is because of the fact that this horse armor came out only 2 weeks after the game was initially released, meaning this additional cosmetic content was planned from the get-go. Nowadays, it's very common to see this, with many full-price games having additional purchasable cosmetics available in the store right upon release. However, at the time, this was not at all standard practice, and it actually left a bad stain on the public perception of Oblivion. While the game initially released to extreme praise, with many people including myself calling it one of the best role-playing games ever, this horse armor microtransaction led to a ton of public backlash because of the obvious greed that it displayed. An extra $2.50 for an item that should have been included in the base game, when consumers literally just paid full price for your game a few weeks back, is not a good look for a company at all. And unfortunately, as many gamers predicted, this was a pretty slippery slope that we are now seeing the repercussions of. See, I don't think the $2.50 price tag itself is what outraged gamers. That's not a lot of money for most people, and even back then that was the case. But it showed that companies like Bethesda were willing to provide consumers with an incomplete product in order for a quick cash grab. And after seeing the additional revenue generated, many other companies followed suit. See, negative backlash doesn't really matter to a company as long as they are still making tons of money. It's pretty easy for people like Todd Howard to wipe away his tears with dollar bills and move on. What's even more confusing about Bethesda's choice to release this paid Horse Armor DLC is the solid expansions that followed it in the months after. Later that year in 2006, the first expansion for Oblivion called Knights of the Nine was released. And while in my opinion there's nothing particularly amazing about this expansion, it does provide a decent sized additional quest as well as new cosmetics for the player. Knights of the Nine costed an additional $10, but due to the fact that it actually provided players with great value, it was well received by the public. A few months later, the next and my personal favorite expansion ever, called the Shivering Isles, was released for a whopping $30. But again, even given its relatively large price tag at the time, it was received extremely well because the content itself was absolutely fantastic. It not only provided players with new quests, but it offered them a whole new world to complete those quests in. Once the expansion was installed, there is a portal in the game that brings you to an entirely new world where almost everything is different. The scenery, the atmosphere, the choices you make, even the voice actors. It's literally like playing Oblivion Part 2. And even today, I highly recommend playing this DLC to everyone if you enjoy Bethesda games, as I really do consider it a masterpiece. This also goes to show that when you provide enough value in your downloadable content, consumers are really happy to pay for it. However, if you blatantly try to rip people off with a quick cash grab, you will lose the trust and the loyalty of consumers. The Elder Scrolls Oblivion will always be remembered as both a game that had one of the best DLCs ever and one of the worst DLCs ever. Though its reputation is not bad all these years later, many people still immediately jump to Horse Armor when they hear anything about the game. With the rumors of a remaster around the corner, that negative perception can directly impact its sales. And with Bethesda's recent lackluster release in Starfield, if this remake doesn't do well, it could potentially be the nail in the coffin for the company. Now, the last point I want to touch on more in this video is the previously mentioned slippery slope, which this Horse Armor cosmetic helped start. As I said, having additional paid cosmetics has become a standard for almost all games, but they are no longer $2.50. Even with inflation, they should cost at most double what they used to. However, we're now seeing games like Diablo 4 and Call of Duty charging $30 for a single skin. That is literally half the price of the base game itself. The craziest thing is people are continuing to buy them. A now very common microtransaction is what's called a loot box, which is essentially like playing a slot machine where you can pay a certain amount of money for a random cosmetic. In my opinion, this is the worst form of downloadable content, as the unfortunate reality is some people face problems with addictions when it comes to this type of thing, and this is a very obvious example of companies preying on those people. And the continued monetary success of these transactions will lead to companies continuing to charge more and more money until they eventually reach that breaking point. If that ever happens, it's pretty sad to see companies that I once loved, like Bethesda and Blizzard Entertainment, go down this awful path of greed. But it's not at all surprising. Who knows, maybe one day we'll get the Elder Scrolls 6 with no microtransactions at all. However, with the way things are currently going, it would not shock me if it ended up with $50 additional cosmetics when that game finally launches. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts on the state of modern microtransactions are. If you're like me, you don't mind them in a free-to-play game, but despise them in paid games. And be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you really enjoyed the video, you could support my weekly uploads by becoming a channel member. And as always, take care guys, I will see you in the next one.